Hey, it is Tuesday. My name is Philip DeFranco, and this is part 2 of today's Philip DeFranco show. This is the bad video, the one that's more likely to be suppressed by YouTube, and actually today gets swarmed with hate. Yeah, we've been having to do this to bypass YouTube's content rating system to get stories out there in front of more eyes. So after you finish this video, if you'd like to watch part 1, it'll be the top link in the description down below, or you can click or tap right there, or it'll be in the end card. Yeah, that about covers that. So let's talk about the situation revolving around Trump speaking publicly yesterday. Right, this is something that people have been waiting for, calling for. A number of people saying, why is it taking so long? Or people noting he got into a beef with Twitter and he was signing an executive order 24 hours later on camera. And what we ended up seeing is that, while the brief 7-minute speech he did finally deliver stirred up a lot of controversy, a lot of the backlash and criticism came from things happening around that event. Right, so before Trump gave his speech in the Rose Garden, what we ended up seeing live was the police and the National Guard dispersing a peaceful protest that was taking place in the park around the White House. And there we saw the authorities using what was initially reported as tear gas. Some have said that it was actually smoke canisters as well as flash grenades. And to remove the protesters, we saw these police clubbing people with batons, battering them with riot shields.
And now you see what's going on now. Now there's just a lot of
violence. And then one of the next things we see is Trump addressing the nation from the Rose Garden saying,
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters.
And according to a number of reports at the time, protesters didn't know why they had been dispersed as it wasn't yet curfew, with the mayor of DC also tweeting, I imposed a curfew at 7 p.m. A full 25 minutes before the curfew and without provocation, federal police used munitions on peaceful protesters in front of the White House, an act that will make the job of DC Police Department officers more difficult, shameful. But then, after Trump's speech, we saw him walking out of the White House through the park where the protest had been to St. John's Church. Right, so we see Trump, some of his family and staff walking across the park where moments ago you had all these protesters. He then stops briefly at the church where a picture and video is taken of him holding a Bible, and it all appeared to be for this kind of just glorified photo op. Photos being posted later with allies praising him. The White House Twitter account putting out something that I can really only describe as propaganda. Which I will say, I just gotta shoot my shot here. If the Trump team is looking for a junior propagandist, I would love to throw my hat in the ring. And with my resume, I'd love to provide 2 examples of what I could do for you. One is kind of a closer version to what y'all are already doing. I kind of wanted to show you how I could already fit into the team. And the second one is very different, but I think you'll appreciate the effectiveness. Okay, so here is version 1. Look at Trump, he is a strong man. Look at Trump, he rules this land. Look at him, not in a bunker. Your wife loves him so much, she wants him to fuck her. And also here's a Bible. And I didn't burst into flames. Don't know why you think I would. Also, maybe I was sent from God, but I won't say it myself, but other pastors actually have. America. Right, so strong, manly, big hands, right? That's what we're going for. So there's that, and then version 2, just kind of a heads up. I kind of went with a different tone with the music, and I also included some footage that I think that you were thinking of including, but then didn't.
I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters.
And now you see what's
exactly what it looks like. We're just staying safely.
Oh!
Whoa!
So essentially, these police you see right here, and they're advancing again. Now there's just a lot of violence erupting.
Heard us telling them that we were media, but they don't care. They are being indiscriminate at the moment.
The president just used a Bible, the most sacred text of the Judeo-Christian tradition, and one of the churches of my diocese, without permission, as a backdrop for a message antithetical to the teachings of Jesus and everything that our churches stand for. And to do so, as you just said, he sanctioned the use of tear gas by police officers in riot gear to clear the church yard. I am outraged.
So I guess, yeah, just let me know. We've seen a number of outlets saying or insinuating that it was Trump who dispatched the law enforcement, but since then there's been a lot of confusion over which law enforcement bodies were actually involved, how they were involved, who dispatched them. For example, this morning we saw a Twitter thread circulating from a local reporter in DC who said that a source told him that the park police actually didn't know Trump was going to walk across the park, also claiming the source said tear gas was never used, but police deployed smoke canisters because protesters started pelting them with water bottles and were standing on a structure that had been burned the day before, though going on to note it's possible that another agency used tear gas. But But the DC Metro Police, the Park Police, and the National Guard have all said that they did not use tear gas. And while the Secret Service declined to comment to all requests, the Park Police said in a statement this afternoon, no tear gas was used by USPP officers or others assisting law enforcement partners to close the area at Lafayette Park. And notably, the statement also said that the Park Police pushed the protesters back because they were, quote, throwing projectiles including bricks, frozen water bottles, and caustic liquids. And after that, they claimed they issued 3 warnings on a loudspeaker to evacuate before they eventually cleared the area. But that contradicts the numerous accounts of journalists and protesters who were there on the ground who have said that the protests were peaceful, that there was no provocation, and that tear gas, or at least some kind of chemical gas that burns your eyes, was fired at the protesters. And to that point, we saw an MSNBC correspondent who was on the ground responding to that local reporter's thread, saying that tear gas had definitely been used, and also adding that there was no object throwing before the mounted Park Police moved in. And a little after that, we saw a Justice Department official telling the Washington Post that it was actually Attorney General Bill Barr personally who ordered the law enforcement officials on the ground to push the protesters back and extend the perimeter. Also, 2 federal law enforcement officials separately told the Post that the decision had been made earlier with Barr's input. One of the enforcement officials also adding that in the afternoon, Barr went to look at the setup, found that the perimeter had not been extended, and asked law enforcement to fix it, with the law enforcement officials saying that Barr, quote, assumed that any resistance from the protesters of being moved would be met with typical crowd control measures, though that official also defended Barr's decision, saying this plan was happening regardless of any plans of the president. But even though those officials said that this plan had already been set, a White House spokesperson said later this afternoon that the crowd was dispersed to enforce the 7 p.m. curfew, and according to the Washington Post, the White House and Secret Service declined to say who gave the order to clear the park. Defense officials said the National Guard did not participate in the decision, and the DC Chief of Police said that his force was not involved in moving back the protesters, and that law enforcement had already decided federal officials would be responsible for that area. But regardless, Trump's decision to go to St. John's was also highly controversial and widely criticized on its own. It's known as the Church of the Presidents and has hosted every U.S. president since its founding in 1816. And notably here, it's reported that Trump's visit to that church was completely unannounced, with church authorities publicly expressing their outrage that he did not inform them that he was coming. Right, and that's why on TV we had the Right Reverend Marianne Edgar Buddy, the Episcopal Bishop of Washington, who has oversight responsibilities for that church, saying,
The president did not pray when he came to St. John's, nor, as you just articulated, did he acknowledge the agony of our country right now, and in particular that of the people of color in our nation who wonder if anyone in public power will ever acknowledge their sacred worth, and who are rightfully demanding an end to 400 years of systemic racism and white supremacy in our country. And I just want the world to know that we in the Diocese of Washington, following Jesus and his way of love, we distance ourselves from the incendiary language of this president.
With Buddy also doubling down even more in her rebuke of Trump in an interview with the Washington Post, where she said, everything he has said and done is to inflame violence. We need moral leadership, and he's done everything to divide us. Right, and that was something that we saw echoed by a number of other religious leaders and clergy members. Right, and so that's kind of the bigger, broader story, but it's also important that we actually take a look at what Trump said during his speech. Right, and there we saw him saying a number of things, starting out by saying there will be justice for George Floyd, before quickly moving on to condemn the violence and criticize local leaders for not taking enough action.
But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents. These are not acts of peaceful protest. These are acts of domestic terror.
Trump also saying that he's mobilizing both civilian and military resources, also adding that he recommended every governor deploy the National Guard and that local leaders need to establish overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence is over, and very notably saying,
if a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them.
With Trump also going on to say that he had already dispatched thousands of heavily armed military personnel and law enforcement officers in D.C. and continuing,
I want the organizers of this terror to be on notice that you will face severe criminal penalties and lengthy sentences in jail. This includes Antifa and others who are leading instigators of this violence.
Right, so there's a few things to unpack here, but I want to close by focusing on Trump threatening to deploy the military within the United States, because that is a huge deal. Right, one of the big questions here, one of the big questions that is constantly asked when Trump makes a decision is, can he legally do that? And because we're talking about it now, you can probably guess that the answer is not a simple answer. Trump could invoke the Insurrection Act of 1807, which gives the president the power to deploy the military for domestic law enforcement under certain circumstances. This, however, is very rare. The last time it was used was in 1992 during the Rodney King riots in California. But notably there remember, that was at the request of the state's governor. Trump also does have significant power over what he can do within the borders of the District of Columbia, but the ways in which the president can use troops domestically are more limited without the approval of a state. And that's because the president can only deploy the military to enforce state law if a state makes that request. Now, notably here, the Insurrection Act does say that the president can send the military to a state without the approval of the state's governor or legislature, but they can only enforce federal laws. And even then, if Trump were to take that path, he would first have to issue a proclamation to disperse, which basically gives the protesters a certain amount of time to stop before he can legally send the military in. And there are historic examples of the president going against local leaders, such as Dwight Eisenhower and John F. Kennedy during the Civil Rights era. And currently, no states have publicly said that they want Trump to send in the military. So right now, it is unclear if this is something that Trump is actually going to follow through with, or if it's just an empty threat. But what is clear is that he's setting himself up for a battle with governors. Immediately after Trump's speech, a number of governors were quick to condemn the move. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz telling reporters that he thanked Trump for his input but disagreed, adding,
"A posture of a force on the ground is both unsustainable militarily, it's also unsustainable socially, because it's the antithesis of how we live."
As well as J.B. Pritzker of Illinois saying, "I reject the notion that the federal government can send troops into the state of Illinois. The fact is that the president has created an incendiary moment here. He wants to change the subject from his failure over coronavirus, a miserable failure, and now see a moment when there's unrest because of the injustice that was done to George Floyd, that he now wants to create another topic and something where he can be the law and order president." Right, and of course, notably, this is just kind of the next stage of the governors and Trump. You know, there was that audio from that private conference call that was leaked this week where on Monday Trump was telling governors they need to crack down on protesters.
You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people, and you have to try people, and they have to go to jail for long periods of time.
But ultimately, that is where we are with this story right now, and of course, with all of it. I now want to pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts on this? And that is where this video, part 2 of today's Philip DeFranco Show, ends. As always, thank you for watching, supporting, sharing, being a part of the conversation down below. Also, if you haven't already watched the first part of today's show, once again, link down below, or you can click or tap right there. It's been a long day. But yeah, if you've already watched both, I love your faces, and I'll see you tomorrow.